Hi, my name is Gibson. I'm the owner and founder of the Personal Development School. This is your daily breakthrough video, and today I want to talk about a really, really important topic, which is this idea that certain personality types, especially the fearful, avoidant attachment style, but also the anxious as well, can be riddled with guilt. And I want to talk about the net impact of guilt itself. I want to talk about effective ways to shift your perception around guilt and to build a healthy relationship to the emotion of guilt. And I want you to understand where this comes from if this is you and what to actually do about it, because this is one of those things. There's a famous doctor named Dr. Gabor Mate, and he's done a lot of work with trauma, chronic illness, all kinds of things. And he makes a very strong link between guilt itself as an emotion and long-term problems with health, physical health specifically. Of course, mental, emotional health and well-being are deeply impacted by guilt as well. But there really are long-term physical consequences of having too much guilt that you're always perceiving and keeping and sort of storing. So I'm going to go through a little bit of those details today from some of his research, and I'm going to talk to you about sort of how everything comes to be and how guilt gets so deeply programmed and embedded in your nervous system and really what to do about it. So before I get into the topic of these videos themselves, I'm super, super excited. Like, we are launching all of the online personal development school courses. We've got our first bunch coming out literally just a few weeks. So if you haven't had the chance yet to go online and reserve your early bird pricing, we are working to get so much valuable transformational information out to as many people as possible. We are, I was, in previous videos, I was like, okay, what do you guys want for membership options? And do you want, member options where you pay monthly and you can have access to all the courses? Do you want individual courses? You guys were like, we want both. So we're putting both. We are literally working to make this platform super accessible, super available to everybody who wants to be a part of their healing. We're giving, all the courses come with individualized workbooks. They come with really in-depth processes, repatterning exercises, cue cards and a bunch of them for processes to remind you throughout the day. You will get reprogramming work and you will get some massive transformation out of all of these courses. And you'll see the root causes of a whole bunch of things that you're experiencing and just have the awareness for your own relationship to self and with others and all these amazing things. Anyways, I keep rambling about this because I'm just so excited to be sharing this information and be able to just help people finally have really good, effective tools when I was somebody who also needed them once, and just really excited to be sharing this and putting this out here. So if you get a chance, you can go to www.personaldevelopmentschool.com and you can go on the website, and under transformational course offerings, if you just want to reserve your early bird pricing, you don't have to pay for anything right now. You just reserve your early bird pricing by putting in which courses you want to reserve on there and the contact information. So without further delay, I am going to jump into this video. And I hope I don't have blueberry in my teeth because I just ate a bunch of blueberries. And if I do, I'm sorry, I'm recording this video in one shot and you'll have to look at the blueberries. Anyways, okay, so first and foremost, in all seriousness, if this is you and you are somebody who struggles with chronic guilt, there's a beautiful quote by this man that I was mentioning earlier, Dr. Gabor Mate. And I'm a huge fan of his work. Check it out. He's a medical doctor, but he did a lot of work, I think, as well as a psychotherapist or a psychiatrist. And he went through this whole process and really did a whole bunch of case studies about the mind-body connection and how certain emotions are linked to certain chronic illnesses and disease. And one of the main things that he says is that almost all autoimmune disorders have a strong foundation in chronically stored subconscious guilt. So things like multiple sclerosis, scleroderma, fibromyalgia, you name it. Usually an individual is largely riddled with guilt, and this is at least a catalyzing factor according to his research and his body of work. So, if this is you, we don't want to take guilt lightly, and we want to really take a look at what guilt is, how it's working, and what we can really do about it. So First and foremost, usually if you're somebody who's struggling with guilt, it's because guilt for you became a very strong adaptation strategy or survival mechanism. So let me paint a picture for you for a moment about how this would look, okay? And this is going to be based on the majority of cases that I see. If a baby comes into the world, okay, babies were born with 3 biological fears: the fear of falling, the fear of loud noises, and the fear of survival. So when you come into the world and you are wired for that, you're this biological fear of abandonment, you're wired for connection. You come in and you are like super attuned to your caregivers. And I've worked with people under hypnosis, and they'll pull up early memories and they'll talk to me about how they're like in their crib and they're 2 years old and they can feel that mom is sad and they can feel that dad is angry. And like, we are so attuned as children when we come into this world to our parents' emotions and their state of well-being. And even Gabor Mate, again, I'm just thinking of a thing I was watching not too long ago. He talks about how, oh shoot, now I forget what I was going to say. Oh, he talks about how the best thing a parent can give to their child in the first 3 years is their own happiness. Because as children are super like narcissistic in the sense that they personalize everything and they feel everything as well on top of that. And so, if they're personalizing everything, we can't help as children but make emotional inferences. Like if mom is upset because mom's going through depression or mom's going through loss or grief for some reason, or the house isn't a safe place, there's violence in the home or instability of some sort, the child isn't like, oh, mom's not having a good day. The child's like, what am I doing wrong? And so we are personalizing and absorbing all of these things in our environment, especially in the first 3 years and really the first 8 years of our lives. The first 8 years of our life, and I'm sort of like digressing here, but the first 8 years of our lives, our brain is basically in a state of hypnosis based on the brain waves we're producing. We're producing mostly alpha and theta brain waves, which are the predominant brain waves you need to be in either a trance-like state or a fairly deep state of hypnosis itself. So as a child, that's kind of the state of consciousness that you're operating in. So you're like a sponge absorbing everything. And again, really early on, personalizing everything, assuming that everything is about you and is revolving around you. So what you're around and what you see, you personalize. Okay, so now we're going to link this to guilt. So if you go through all of these experiences at a very young age where either mom and dad are both emotionally unavailable, or because maybe they're both avoidant, dismissive avoidant attachment styles, or because there's some kind of grief in the home, somebody just lost a relative or a family member, or there's a divorce, or there's an absentee parent. If you have any parents who are emotionally unavailable, and especially if in that mix, one is emotionally unavailable and withdrawn, and the other one is actually deriving a sense of connection from you, okay? So if they're a parent who feels unhappy with their partner, so let's pretend, for example, dad is emotionally unavailable and mom is codependent, and so she's like trying to get her emotional needs met from dad who's not meeting them, and so she kind of like cries around you a lot or holds you, or when she's sad or down, she goes to sort of hug you and cry with on you, or things like that, where she's kind of like deriving the sense of nurturing from your presence, from you existing. And I think people can relate to that. Like sometimes I'll hear clients tell me things like, oh, when I'm sad, like I'll just go get my dog and cuddle my dog and cry. Like it would be sort of analogous to that. And if this is happening, whether it's both a parent being very withdrawn or there being sort of this child picking up on their parents' pain, and those parents, and this is the key point here, those parents not being attuned to their child, okay, so they're not fully attuned to like the impact their emotions are having on their children. They're not super aware of their child's needs or well-being. They're not thinking about how their child's emotionally processing the world, which honestly, the majority of us didn't get from our parents, because of course our parents are just passing along their own unconsciousness. Not their fault, but they often didn't get those things met, and so on and so forth as you go up generations, right? So if this is happening, and this child's attuned to this parent's emotions, well, guess what happens? The child starts having this major fear of abandonment, because without that attunement that's going both ways, that child's biological fear of abandonment is triggered, because the only way they can feel like they are not getting abandoned is if they feel like that caregiver is attuned to them, is emotionally connected to them, is available and present for them, has the emotional bandwidth to be a present parent. All of those things are majorly impactful. They're so seemingly small and they so fly under the radar, but the magnitude of their impact is huge. So if this is what happens, if these were the dynamics, it can be that simple to produce an unhealthy attachment style or a form of attachment trauma. If these were the dynamics that you received as a child, then what happens is you will make an adaptation that says, okay, I have to be super attuned to my parents and I have to be hyper vigilant about my connection to my parents in order to stop myself from being disconnected emotionally and thus feeling like I might be abandoned. So attunement is essentially like this feeling that your parent is connected to you and vice versa, which sort of insulates the little child from their own fear biologically of abandonment. Okay, so let me just give you like a little review so far really, really quick. If you have emotionally unavailable parents, guess what happens? You become hypervigilant, you become attuned to your parents' needs and their feelings as a form of maintaining that emotional connection. Okay, so then guess what happens? You become more connected to your parents' feelings than to your own, more attuned to their feelings and their needs than to your own. And those are the breeding grounds to produce massive amounts of guilt. Why? Because you can feel badly for them and you can't really feel badly or feel super connected to your own feelings and needs, because it doesn't really feel safe to feel that way anyways. Your feelings and needs don't become your priority if you're too worried about your survival. So it'll produce, that whole adaptation paradigm will produce this massive fear of being bad, okay? Because if I'm bad, I'll get disconnected from and I might be abandoned. And so there will be this massive core wound or fear, this deep idea that, oh my gosh, what if I'm bad? And bad for you, if this was your paradigm, became unsafe. It became so unsafe to potentially threaten or violate the emotional connection to your parents that you were giving, that you were showing up for, because you didn't have a consistent reciprocity of that emotional connection that made you feel safe enough to try to just be yourself. Okay, so this becomes a two-layered problem. Why? Well, your emotional body is hyper aware of guilt to begin with. So your emotions are hyper aware, not of guilt, of the potential of guilt. Okay, so you're super afraid of any time that you could be bad or feel guilty or not be good enough in some way too. Like all these things will be terrifying to you because, again, your subconscious mind has made a deep link to the potential of abandonment. Okay, so the two-layered problem here is that you'll start to become over-attached to everybody else's needs and under-attached to your own feelings and needs. So you'll naturally perceive guilt everywhere, because the moment you see somebody upset or down, or especially if they're close to you, you'll think things like, I'm not doing enough, I should help them, I should fix them, I should save them. If you can't, which realistically we definitely can't help and fix and save everybody, right? Like we can't be responsible for changing other people. So if we can't, we'll feel this like helplessness and then even more guilt that we can't fix them or save them or do it right or properly. So we'll have this, and we'll feel guilty. We'll feel sad for other people. We'll see the person on the street. We'll feel super guilty for them, and not like in a healthy way of compassion and empathy, but like sympathy and guilt and like, oh, the world's such a bad place, and just things that are disproportionate and not functional. Like it's functional to have the compassion for the homeless person, to offer them your energy or your time, or donate money if you think they're using it for healthy purposes, things like that. Like those are functional pieces. But to just feel deep sadness and remorse and all these different things, you're just creating your own suffering unconsciously, and hurt people. Okay, so I'm going to get into that for a second about how guilt doesn't serve. But so the two parts of this problem are that, number one, we perceive guilt everywhere because we are over attached to the feelings and needs of others and under attached to our own feelings and needs. And number two is that your subconscious mind will want to hang on to this program of guilt because it thinks that it's unsafe to let it go. People who are riddled with guilt will be terrified of being bad. Okay, they'll be so afraid of being a bad guy or a bad, oh my gosh, what if I hurt somebody's feelings? people will tell me when they're riddled with guilt, things that are like amazingly guilty. And I've actually had my own experiences of things like this, like majorly disproportionate guilt to like how small things are. I've had to do a lot of work on reprogramming this, but I'll just give you a personal example. I remember one time one of my friends upset me by something that they did, or really my perceptions about them upset myself. But in this dynamic, there was something that happened and I felt that it was inappropriate, and I told my other friend instead of going directly to the person. And this friend kind of brought it up between the three of us, and like the level of guilt that I felt was almost like debilitating. Like I remember I canceled the rest of what I was supposed to do for the day because I just felt like, oh my goodness. And a lot of it was because I had some early attachment trauma, and so the reason that this was so strong for me, right, is because my subconscious mind had made this profound link between not being bad and surviving. So guilt became this adaptation or survival structure. Like if I can be super attuned to anything, everybody else's feelings, and go to my way to make sure I'm not guilty for anything, and I'm always being such a good person and all these different things, and putting so much pressure on myself to fix or save other people, if that's the programming I have, I'm way more likely to survive. And that's what that subconscious mind riddled with guilt, that's like the paradigm or the lens that they're kind of viewing their reality through to a certain degree. And again, it's just an adaptation that the subconscious mind makes. If I'm attuned to others and I show up for them and meet their needs, I'm going to get my needs met, and at least I'll get some kind of emotional connection, which makes me feel connected and less likely to be abandoned, which is one of my only biological fears, very much related to safety and survival. I hope this makes sense. Because I'm just making this sort of link all the way through. So Dr. Gabor Mate, when I said I was going to mention his work, he has this amazing book, and it's called When the Body Says No. And this is this book where he's making the link between a lot of autoimmune disorders or chronic illnesses and guilt itself. And he says a really profound quote that I've loved forever and has really stuck with me. And he says, trauma is two things. Trauma are the things that happened that shouldn't have happened. So for example, if there's violence in the home, that shouldn't have happened. Like that's not a healthy dynamic to be in. And things that didn't happen that should have happened. So this is his quote. Okay. So what he's saying is that, equal to violence, and of course all cases are different, but just like violence can be a really painful thing, emotional neglect, a lack of having a child with a healthy, emotionally available parent, or both parents, those are their own forms of trauma. And again, he's produced a lot of guilt. These things fly way under the radar. They're way under acknowledged, under valued. They're not talked about enough, in my opinion. So we're not getting the proper tools for deep resolution around these things. And of course, they're impacting our health. Okay. So you can know that you're struggling with guilt if you're a major people pleaser, if you find yourself trying to fix or solve other people's problems, if you think that you're a bad person very easily, if you feel the emotions of guilt often, all these different things. So here's what I want to tell you about guilt now, okay? So number one, guilt is not really serving. So it's hurt people that hurt people. And I can tell you this through every single case of every client I've ever worked with, every person I've ever seen. I would say that unless somebody is seriously like a psychopath from birth with, a smaller amygdala and actual like brain structural regions that are different, I would say, some people would fight this point, but I would say basically every case of somebody who's hurting somebody else, and I'm not justifying it, and I'm not saying the behaviors are okay, but almost every case of somebody who's done something painful to another person does so because they're in their own state of deep fear, desperation, or suffering. So when we take something like guilt and we guilt ourselves to make ourselves good, it's totally dysfunctional. It does not work that way. We don't become better people by causing ourselves more pain and then expecting ourselves to show up better. The reality is we can give what we have. We show up according to how we feel. So when we are in a happy emotional space, we have a lot more to give to other people. When we're guilting or shaming ourselves and we feel terrible, and how are we going to show up for anybody, right? We can't even show up for ourselves. So guilt, it tends to another thing is there's something called the ironic processing theory in psychology. So it's like if I say to you, don't think of the pink elephant, what happens? You think of the pink elephant. So the same thing applies for guilt. If I'm like, oh, I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have done that. I can't believe I did that. Your brain isn't, your subconscious mind isn't like really picking up on all the negatives so much, like the shouldn't have or don't. It really just gets, because it's programmed through repetition plus emotion. If you're just repetitively focusing on some negative idea, so it's eliciting this negative emotional response, basically you're just like wiring in the greater likelihood of you repeating that error. So that's really important to note as well. But I think most importantly, guilt covers the root of the problem. Okay, so I'm going to play out an analogy for you for a moment. So let's pretend that you wake up and you are with your husband or your wife, and you wake up and your husband, let's say it's your husband, and you wake up and you get snappy with your husband. You're short with your husband in the morning. Okay, and then let's say, half an hour later, you're like guilting yourself for it. Like, oh, I shouldn't have been short with him. Why did I make that passive aggressive comment? What's wrong with me? Oh my goodness, what's he going to think of me? I ruined his day. And let's say you're like guilting and you're getting into that storyline and trajectory of guilt. You are not doing anything productive to solve the root of the problem. It prevents you from inquiring about why you behaved that way in the first place. So let's say, for example, the reason that you got snappy is because your husband didn't say good morning in the morning, and you were craving for emotional connection, and he was sort of dismissive. And instead of being able to go to him and say, hey, a moment ago, you were dismissive, and I sort of personalized it a little bit, and I could really use some connection or presence this week. We haven't been spending enough time together lately. Like, instead of being able to inquire about why you behave that way so you can fix the problem in a constructive manner through healthy communication, instead, when you literally just judge and shame and guilt yourself, guilt acts as like this cover over isolating and identifying the root problem that caused you to do the thing that you feel guilty about in the first place, which obviously then prevents you from creating long-term solutions to that problem itself. And then people who are riddled with guilt tend to become self-sacrificing because they feel guilty that they acted that way. And when they self-sacrifice, guess what else happens? A conflict or resentment is born of a perception of imbalance. So when you're self-sacrificing because you're trying to alleviate the feelings of guilt that you're having, then often you give too much, receive too little. There's this imbalance. You become resentful or frustrated, and you're setting the stage to do something that you feel guilty about again. So oftentimes this just becomes this entire vicious cycle or loop. And so we have to remove the guilt in order to solve the problem. So instead of feeling guilty and then telling the story that reinforces the guilt, if you notice that you're feeling guilty, I want you to go inwards and say, why did I do the thing in the first place that caused me to feel guilty? Either what need was I trying to get met, or how was I hurting first in a way that caused me to react in the way that I did? And then you're actually inquiring. We're not here to judge and shame and punish ourselves a million times over. We had enough of that in childhood. We're here to notice our mistakes, to be accountable for them, and to go inwards and inquire about why these patterns are even existing or repeating themselves, so we can dig into the root of the problem itself and truly create solutions. Okay, so please remember that if you're somebody that struggles with guilt. And another thing I really want you to know is guilt, it's sort of like, if we're struggling with guilt, it's been conditioned in us to avoid feeling guilt because it doesn't feel good, as a strategy for survival. So a lot of people who are really struggling with guilt, they tend to have this loss of self-identity their entire lives, or as long as they're struggling with these guilt sort of patterns. And here's why. If I am riddled with guilt, I become so afraid of doing things that could make me feel guilty. I get so afraid of the feeling of guilt itself. I get so afraid of being bad, right? Because bad can mean that disconnect and this threat to my survival. And again, we don't think that in our adult lives consciously, but our subconscious mind has these programs that have lived forever and that we see the world through. Our subconscious mind is like the filter we see our reality through. So you get into this space where all of a sudden you're so afraid, you go into your adult life from childhood and you get so afraid of feeling guilty or doing something wrong or bad, that you end up spending so much of your life just making decisions as a people pleaser. You're not even aware of your own feelings and needs because you're too busy in this like fight or flight state trying to avoid guilt. And so we lose our self-identity to guilt a lot of the time because we become so afraid of hurting other people or feeling more guilty that we don't make decisions for our own feelings or needs. And basically, we spend our lives more focused on avoiding guilt than connecting to our own feelings and needs and creating a life for ourselves that we're interested in living. So we live for others, we limit our potential. We tend to perpetuate the problems more and more, the more guilty we feel. We get stuck in that loop, right? We become people pleasers. We often become very codependent. Guilt is a great underlying patterning. The fear of being bad and the hypervigilance to be attuned to other people's emotions as an adaptation or survival mechanism. And the link between I am bad or I could do something wrong to hurt other people and feeling unsafe. All of those things are the exact patterns you need to be a codependent. So there's other ones in there, but those are like major. We create resentment the more guilt we have because then we tend to keep getting lost in that loop and create that perception of imbalance. And over giving and under receiving because we're giving, people pleasing, and then we're not allowing ourselves to receive. This over time, this imbalance of give and receive, it doesn't bode well in our bodies for long periods of time. Gabor Mate's book, like his sort of like thesis of the book is like, when the body says no, what he's saying is if people are not learning to say no and express their own feelings and needs and boundaries themselves, the body will eventually say no for you. So these are not small things. So here are some core beliefs that I see as well that people have who are really struggling with guilt. Number one, I am responsible for other people's feelings. Tends to be a really huge one. This major belief that I am bad if I ever hurt somebody, and I am selfish. I should help other people before myself. And so these core beliefs will come together and create a lot of pain. So here's what we want to do if this is your experience. Number one, and I'm going to make a separate video about like deep guilt reprogramming, but number one, keep a guilt journal. First, you have to notice just how much guilt is showing up in your life. Every time I've had this discussion with individuals who think that they're struggling with guilt, and then they actually start looking, like they'll tell me things like guilt is everywhere. It's like pervasive. I feel guilty for everything. That's not going to help you live a happy, fulfilled life. It's not going to help you have healthy relationships. It's not going to help you be physically in good health long term. Like, this is so important. And then what you want to start doing is reprogramming those core beliefs about bad, selfish, responsible for other people's feelings. I have a whole video on reprogramming. I'm going to do a whole video on reprogramming around guilt. But just as like an initial last thing that I'll say in this video specifically is you want to start looking for your innocence. Why is it okay to have your own feelings and needs? And another little exercise you can do as well before the reprogramming. So guilt journal. And then go through the 7 areas of life: career, financial, mental, emotional, physical, spiritual, relational, and write in those 7 areas of life what your needs actually are from others. And start creating strategies. It's a form of reprogramming anyways, exposure response, strategies to get those needs met yourself. Or, sorry, not yourself, through those people. Like, you have to start learning that it's okay to be vulnerable, ask for help, and you have to intentionally and consciously change your relationship to what it means to ask for help and to receive from others, so that you're bringing things back into balance, so there's no other part of your body or unconscious mind that tries to do it for you. Okay. I really wanted to get that all out. I hope you stayed to the end of the video because there was some important stuff in here. I'll make another whole video on reprogramming itself. Thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you for being on this journey with me, or really like letting me be on your journey. It's like a friggin' blessing to see the comments and get the emails and just like have all the connections to all of you that I'm blessed enough to receive, and that you're doing this work, that you're jumping into these things and like doing the reprogramming, doing the repatterning, learning about this stuff, implementing it in your own life. Like, I just think it's fabulous, and it's a blessing to be able to share this stuff with you guys and be a part of it. So thank you so much, and I will see you soon.